Agonizing wait for the families of those killed when flight MH17 was shot down over eastern Ukraine. Think about it. They're still sitting back home, waiting to learn whether their loved ones' remains have been recovered. Bodies and other human remains are right now sitting in a factory in Ukraine. We had originally heard most of the bodies had been put on this so-called morgue train, but now we know that nearly 100 bodies are still unaccounted for, possibly back at the crash site. For the 200 bodies that made it, they will soon be flown back to the Netherlands, where the grim process will begin to sort out the victims' identities and perform forensic testing. And then you see here the black boxes. They'll be heading in a different direction on a different plane to the UK for analysis. And one person who knows very well what it's like to tangle with Russian President Vladimir Putin. He is the former president of the Republic of Georgia. Not too long ago, it was just 2008, as Georgia tilted toward the West in its policies, pro-Russian separatists and Georgian troops clashed in eastern Georgia. Russia responded by sending aid and Russian troops into Georgian territory. And a familiar scenario for anyone who's been following reports out of Ukraine. Mikheil Saakashvili was Georgia's president back then. He has written a column for Political Magazine outlining his advice for what the West should do to rein in Russia's interference in Ukraine. And Mr. Saakashvili is now senior statesman at Tufts University's Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy. Mr. President, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on your show.
You, sir, know better than most Putin's rhetoric. As president, as we pointed out, you went to war with the man not only just 6 years ago. So tell me this, because you have these pro-Russian rebels now suddenly handing over the black boxes to investigators, releasing that morgue train into Ukraine-controlled territory. What do you really think Putin is up to behind the scenes?
Well, I think Putin is very much on the scene, not only behind the scenes. From the very beginning, this is operation set by him, set in motion by him. I cannot imagine, we had the same kind of ground-to-air, surface-to-air missiles, the old Soviet systems in Georgian army. And as a commander-in-chief, I had intimate knowledge of how they work. And I can tell you that there is no way any army, especially the Russian one, would hand over those missile batteries to some semi-controlled or paramilitary elements. They would only operate it with the people who are under full command and control of Russian army and its command. So, of course, they have direct link to what happened on this plane. It's also very hard to imagine how the system would mistake a civilian plane for military one, because military ones are much smaller. And by the way, this is a very sophisticated system. They can distinguish. So there are many questions here, but there is no question about direct responsibility of Russian command for what happened.
Two different things. Let me just jump in. Two different things
Sure.
that's jumping out at me that you just said. One, you're saying you believe, and we're still sorting out the facts, that you believe Russians would have definitely had to have been on site. Maybe not the ones pulling the trigger to this missile system, but having been on site to oversee it. And that's just, one of these points you're making. You describe this, though, when you look at Putin. You describe this as a game that he mastered years ago. He tells the world one thing, he tells the world what they want to hear, and then he does something else, right? For example, in this case, really training rebels and sending in more weaponry across the border. So what then? I mean, how do you get Europe to jump on and draw the line? Because so far, they haven't yet.
Well, remember, for Putin, lying is an instrument of communication, and he is not. It's not something that he invented. Actually, when Soviet Union shot down KLL flight, the South Korean jetliner going from New York, actually, the Russian generals went on television to explain their long theories of conspiracy, that everybody else was to be blamed, exactly the same way like Russian generals did it yesterday on Russian media. Today, every Russian television basically is convinced and convincing its people that these are either Americans downing that plane or Ukrainians, anybody but the Russians.
They're conspiracies.
So that's basically, but these are official Russian channels. These are not some, second-rate or third-rate tabloids that are doing that. So, and this is Russian government that's basically implying that. But the other thing is that, Putin, at the beginning of this conflict, everybody has been saying, oh, Putin is so smart, he's so great, he has been acting so well. But in fact, he made just sort of several very stupid blunders, especially lately. And the reality is that he stepped into conflict from where there is no good way out for him. He has applied very much the same techniques as in Georgia, when actually Russian troops, unidentified Russian troops, entered our territory. That's to them we responded, not to the separatists. We had separatists for years, but we responded already to intrusion of the Russians, and that's when Russia showed up openly. So he applies the same tactics, except that Ukraine is 10 times bigger than Georgia. I think this is in the middle of Europe, and I think Europe has to react. And the reality is not that Putin is so great or so strong. The reality, he has strong will to confront, and the West, especially Europe, has very weak will to stop him. So the idea is that every time he goes for conflict with Georgia or with Ukraine, he implies that he's fighting with the United States. He's his primary target. He says that openly. His speeches are mostly about the U.S. and blaming the U.S. And certainly he's also after Europe. But he thinks that he could corrupt, manipulate and intimidate Europe. But I think that's his big strategic blunder as well. Yeah.
I'm hearing multiple blunders, and also the fact that you're saying it sounds like it is different from Georgia, Ukraine, 10 times larger. I hear you talking about the U.S., but I'd love to, just since we have you on and you have sat in the room with this man, certainly many more times than any of our viewers have. I mean, I just want to ask you about Putin the man. He's kind of a mystery to a lot of people, Mr. President, and you famously said that Vladimir Putin wanted you caged or killed.
Well, he wanted to hang me by certain balls of the.
I wasn't going to go there, but
certain
you can go
parts
there.
of my body. I said it, but actually he said it many times publicly. But the reality is, yeah, he likes to intimidate. In our case, the thing was that he still couldn't get rid of my government, even if he invaded us with 100,000 plus army, precisely because at a certain moment the United States stood up to him. And that moment, the U.S. has sent its Sixth Fleet, has put its planes on the air. Of course, we also resisted as we could with our small resources. And actually, there was this certain line when he had to stop. So Putin will stop at the line when he will be stopped.
Who draws the line, Mr. President? Who draws the line? The United States has tried drawing the line. We're waiting for tougher sanctions from the EU. Thus far, it's just individuals. Who draws the line?
I think just targeting individuals will not do the thing here. I think what the U.S. has done is a step in right direction. I think what Europeans can realistically do, and it's absolutely it's doable and it's necessary, and they will have to do it sooner or later. The problem is that they usually do it later than sooner, and that's always raises the cost. But the reality is that, when we've been warning about Georgia, we were saying we have if they should have stopped them in Georgia, then Crimea wouldn't have happened. Then Crimea happened. They should have stopped them in Crimea. Then Eastern Ukraine wouldn't have happened. If they had stopped them in Eastern Ukraine, then this downing of the plane wouldn't have happened. If they don't stop him here, it will spread, and it will spread to other countries in Europe. So
I don't even want to think of where that could go next.
Well, Baltic countries, Moldova, but also some other Eastern European countries. So what really is necessary now is that his main task thing is not to confront militarily. I don't think Europeans will have guts or realistic possibility of that. What they really can have, it might be much more efficient than weapons and missiles. They can stop buying Russian oil through the Druzhba pipeline, and even with the turmoil in the Middle East, it can be substituted by other sources of oil. They can stop giving them any technology for oil and gas, and because Russia is so corrupt, they failed to come up with their own technologies. They're fully dependent upon Western technology, so it would shut off Russia's cash machine that feeds all this whole thing.
And arms as well. You have this entire list, 6 different items. We could continue. I know President Mikheil Saakashvili.
It's absolutely despicable thing that French is selling the missile. They can really do the trick, and eventually they will have to do it because there is no other way out from this conflict. The conflict will not fizzle by itself. He needs to be confronted. He needs to be stopped.